I really, I talk a lot about should I mend or should I end? And because it's such a big decision and because there's so much personal work that really needs to happen, the best place to work on yourself is with the person that knows you so well. So if you're not in a physically abusive situation, I often suggest to people if you're on the fence, and God knows I was on the fence so long, I was pretty sure it was part of my body. If you're on the fence, then stay. And the work on mending is work on your part in the relationship. And as you work on yourself and you begin to change, your spouse is either going to come closer or begin to pivot further away.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Becoming More Me. I'm really excited today to introduce you to Karen McMahon. She is a certified relationship and divorce coach, and she's the founder of Journey Beyond Divorce, otherwise known as JBD. She began divorce coaching in 2010 after recognizing that the pain of her own divorce led her on a transformational journey into a powerful and unexpected new life. I can totally relate to that. Karen leads a national team of divorce coaches in supporting men and women around the world to become calm, clear, and confident as they navigate divorce. Karen is the co-author of Stepping Out of Chaos, Turning Pain into Possibility, the creator of JBD's exclusive accelerated divorce recovery program, and the host of the acclaimed Journey Beyond Divorce podcast, of which I had the pleasure to be a guest on back in September of this year, 2023. I believe it was episode 279. So if you want to check out that amazing show, that episode focuses on EFT and nervous system regulation as it pertains to and can help with divorce and trauma. And we're going to continue the divorce discussion here today. So, welcome, Karen. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Teresa, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Let's start with a little bit of just kind of stuff about you outside of the divorce coaching realm. I'd love to just know a little bit more about, where you live, what activities and things you love to do, and who the key players are in your everyday life, people that you enjoy sharing this journey with.
I don't know that anybody has ever started an interview so lovely and personal. So thank you for the question.
Of course. Thank
Um,
you.
I currently live in Rockaway Beach, New York, and I grew up here. And then I left when I was 19. And after my mom passed away 2 years ago, I didn't know where to go. I had moved down to Florida to help her out. And so I thought, well, I'll just go back to my childhood community. So I live a block away from the Atlantic Ocean. And yes, I am in the five boroughs of New York City. People usually have a hard time reconciling those two things. I have my son, who used to live in Washington State when I lived in Florida, now lives across the street about 150 yards away from me. So we went from like polar opposite ends of the continent to the country to being right near each other. And so my adult son and daughter, Christopher and Dominique, are my ongoing joy. Having good relationships with adult children is just so much fun. And I have two dogs, his and mine, that I take walking on the beach all the time. And I love what I do. So my kids would say I work too much. But when I'm not working, I have a pretty beautiful circle of girlfriends and local dog walking friends. And so I would say that I'm in a season of life that's pretty sweet.
Sounds like it. I
Yeah.
love that for you. So, in both of our businesses, we see a lot of people who are in transition, wanting to see what their next move might be and feel like they've really, checked all the boxes and consider all the options. And I think that's especially true with divorce, wouldn't you say? And people don't decide on it lightly. And there's a lot of factors that can make it really complicated and really messy. And yet, you may know the statistics better than I do, but so many marriages end in divorce. Do you know what the percentage is these days for first marriages?
They say that it's going down. So it used to be around 50, it's below 50, but the other thing that's going down is people getting married. So it's like statistics is statistics, right?
Yeah, I
Kind of,
tried to get some good numbers as I prefaced this
right.
show, and I was like,
But
everything has something different to say or a different angle
yeah,
on this. I can't get a basic statistic on this.
what I can tell you, the ratio that I find most important is divorces are give or take around 50% in first marriages, 60% in second marriages, 70% in third marriages. And I bring that up because it's part of why I do what I do. My deep desire is to lower at least the second and third marriage divorce rate by having people realize that they're not divorcing the problem, but they are actually part of the problem.
Yes, that's so important. So,
Yes.
you and I have both personally been through divorces, and I'd like to shine a light today on that tension, that discomfort, the confusion that comes when you're in that realization, for whatever reason, that you simply can't mend the marriage, but perhaps you're not quite ready to take the action to end it. So, for you personally, how did you navigate that strange time during your own divorce, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, for me, it was a very long period of time. And for many of my clients, it is too. Even people on the podcast, when they finally reach out for support, it's like, how long have you been listening? And we'll often hear years. And so, first of all, let's just honor how huge the decision is.
Mm,
It's probably one of the biggest decisions you'll ever make in your life. And it's not just about you, especially when you have children, regardless of the age of those children. It's
right.
like you're making a decision that impacts a family that you created and built. And so that weighs very heavily too. And then fear comes into it. In fact, I often hear, and this is where we'll go with this conversation, that people are confused, but they're actually not so confused. And when you put them in a bubble of nothing bad can happen and you're going to be completely safe and your kids are going to be completely safe, now do you know what you're going to do? And a very large percentage of them are like, oh, yeah, yeah, I definitely know what I'm going to do. And so I think that we have to look at the immensity of the decision, how big and powerful it is, and then we have to look at the fear. And the fear is I'm going to destroy my children. I am going to be lonely for the rest of my life. I am going to be broken in the street. I am going to be
Mm,
scorned by all these people who think I'm making a bad decision because my spouse isn't such a bad person, and it goes on and on. And so there's a lot of different fears that I think present as confusion, but they're not really confusion.
right. And there's such a distinct difference when we're making a decision from a place of fear versus a place of love. And a lot of times when we're navigating divorce, it has to be a place of love for ourselves, which so many of us are struggling with during that time also.
And a lot of people choose fear. I just completed with a woman, 36 years married, and and it was only when we were having our completion conversation that she acknowledged that on her wedding day she wanted to grab her bag and run.
Oh, yeah.
You
That's
know,
been generationally the thing in my family too. I kind of wanted to also. And then it's really interesting. I was doing hypnotherapy with my mom over the weekend for the first time. She'd never done it before, and she'd never done it before with me. And we went away on this girls' weekend, and both my mom and my sister were like, I want to do it. I was like, all right. I'm like, a little bit of a tricky bag when you're working with family, I think, but I'm like, we can do it. We're close. And it was interesting how one of the scenes that she regressed to when we were working on it was her wedding day. And we were working on like the theme of like body confidence and things like that and other things that came up in her life now. But the things that she could remember, like it was just yesterday when we tapped into the subconscious, were crazy. And I think a lot of us, I mean, for me, it comes down to intuition, like working with people's intuition to understand like that you really never really wanted it in the first place a lot of times. And now how do we rectify that?
right.
So how did you know when it was when you were going through this that it was time? Like what
So
brought
for
you there?
me, I had we had a physical altercation that I began on my daughter's 2-year birthday. And then I went into therapy. And then we went into marriage counseling, and then we went into marriage counseling. And so there was just a tremendous amount of trying. My parents divorced, and so I was pretty adamant
Mine
that
too.
I wasn't going to do that. And yet, it's almost like it informs what's going to happen unless we break those generational chains. And so there was no intuition. I think that my fear and chaos was so what do they call it? Like a clattering cymbal or something. It was like so loud and obnoxious that there was no tuning into my intuition. So even my final decision to leave was after a devastating night of verbal and emotional abuse. And so I love how you help people tap into intuition, and I do as well, although I think for many of my people, and again, just for your audience, we specialize in high conflict divorce. So it's not the garden variety. We've just grown apart. We love each other. That's not what we're dealing with.
Right.
And so they're quieting the fear voice is a journey in and of itself. And even becoming aware, because if you've been in that kind of a high conflict, chaotic marriage, even becoming aware that you're not in tune with your body, you're not in tune with your intuition, you're running on autopilot, you don't know what intentionality and consciousness is. Like there's so much that's different when you're in that uber chaotic life.
Yeah. That's a good distinction there. So when you were going through your divorce and when you got out of your divorce, what kind of work were you doing then? Were you doing coaching at that time, or did you make a total pivot into divorce coaching?
Total pivot. So my ex-husband was in the printing industry, and he was like, "Oh, you should go into printing." I used to sell real estate way back when, and so I was like, "All right, and I'll sell printing." So I was in the printing industry, which, unlike coaching, is the opposite end of the spectrum. So I was in this dying industry, right? Because it was like when I was doing it in the early 90s, that everyone didn't have a color printer on their desk. Everyone couldn't like just grab a PDF and there was none of that. So
Right.
people printed everything, but
No
it was dying
smartphones.
very quickly. And by the time I got my divorce, and my divorce was 3.5 years long, so it was just a very long, arduous journey. I was such a different human being that I thought there just has to be something more important than ink on paper that God has put me on this earth to do. And that began my exploration that led me to coaching.
Yes, absolutely. And you've gotten back to the ink on paper with book writing and things
Yeah,
like that,
yeah.
but now it's your thoughts, your words, and the way that you can help people. So it's kind of a cool 360, or
I like that.
back to it. I found the same thing in my work, the things that I used to do, and more like when I was a child, the things that lit me up are exactly what I've come back to and come to thrive with as an adult. Like I loved to write poetry and my own books as a kid, and I had like my own little like library and all sorts of other things. And then as an adult, I've come back to the book writing and the writing for my clients in the form of like EFT rounds and hypnotherapy. And I'm like, this is just the stuff that lit me up as a kid. There's no wonder that this is what I'm intended to do now. So
Exactly.
funny how that all comes back. It's cool that it worked out that way for you too. Um, how can somebody come into like alignment then with acknowledging that their marriage may not be salvageable and then figuring out the readiness, the timing, and like the game plan required to take the steps towards ending it?
Yeah. So I really I talk a lot about should I mend or should I end? And because it's such a big decision and because there's so much personal work that really needs to happen, the best place to work on yourself is with the person that knows you so well. So if you're not in a physically abusive situation, I often suggest to people if you're on the fence, and God knows I was on the fence so long, I was pretty sure it was part of my body. If you're on the fence, then stay. And the work on mending is work on your part in the relationship. And as you work on yourself and you begin to change, your spouse is either going to come closer or begin to pivot further away. And regardless of which way it goes, you're further down the road. You know yourself better. And when I talk about work on yourself, in some ways, it's like work on your emotional intelligence is what it comes down to. How well do you know yourself? Do you know your triggers? Do you know what do you know what you want and need that is missing from your marriage? Do you see your way of reacting or communicating or behaving that moves you further away from the marriage you want rather than closer to it? And when you begin to, do you count? Do you count his wrongs versus your wrongs? Like, what are the things that you do? And when you begin to change that, when you begin to dial into a healthier way of being, uh, you've changed the dance on the dance floor. So you guys have been doing a waltz that you're not happy with. Well, either you're stepping on toes or it's turned into a salsa and it's all types of lovely. And all of this helps you to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's also the way that people would come back into alignment if they wanted to heal a marriage. And, whatever way you want to move, it's going to get you closer to it for sure.
Yeah, the path, exactly. That's my point, is the path of mending and ending in the beginning is exactly the same. What a lot of people do, I do not, I have not had good experience with marriage counselors, and so many of my clients haven't. And so what a lot of people do is they take these two people, and I'm going to use this word very softly for the purpose of my illustration, two broken people, two people who have issues.
Sure.
And they come to the marriage council and they say, fix the marriage. And it's like, well, you have flat tires and you're out of alignment, but you want me to fix the marriage. And so my approach when couples come to me is mending involves you working on you and partner two working on yourself so that it can mend if it's meant to mend. And then the only other thing I would say is for those who are in higher conflict situations, take a look at when was the last time you were able to reconcile anything? What conversation, what disagreement, or is the carpet in your living room more like Mount Everest because you keep sweeping it under the rug and walking around it and moving on with your day? How is your communication? Do you always fold? Do you always explode and yell? Like, when you start looking at the dynamic, it might be crystal clear. If all of your loved ones are scratching their head and saying, why in God's name do you stay? These are red flags to look at. You can still do that. I'm going to try and mend, but those are other like really big things that people will share with me. And it's like, but I figured if I gave 200% or 300%, then she would change, he would change. And that's one of the tricks that people get caught in.
Yeah, I think people fail to realize how disempowering it is to think that the other person needs to change because it takes all you lose your power completely because you can't do anything to change the situation if it's up to them to change, when in reality, we can change whatever we want to from our end of things and it can change everything outside of us too.
Teresa, so much so that I run a boundary boot camp, and I can't tell you how
I
often
love that.
I've done it live, and people will raise their hand and say, I have a boundary problem, and they don't have a boundary problem. How do I get him to X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, that's not a boundary. Okay, let's just like get down to basics. Like, that's not a boundary. Getting him to change is not a boundary. And so, yeah, I think that and I was that lost. I was that unconscious, unintentional lost.
But they
So,
don't know how to create and hold their own boundaries.
no, no. So they even thinking that that's a boundary, and then it's like, well, what's the issue, and what do you want different? Well, I want him to or her to. It's like just getting people to like, no, what do you want to feel differently? What can you do differently? And so it's there's when you're that enmeshed, and I'm not making fun. I mean, I was
No,
that
not at
person.
all.
It's just
We've all been ignorant.
it's very murky until it gets clear. And so, to your point of what you said earlier, it's like, God, it feels so good to work on yourself. It feels so good to notice clarity for the first time. It feels so good when that fear voice just lowers the volume and you can actually go, ooh, ooh, oh, is that thing my intuition? Like, oh my God, that feels so amazing when we plug into that. And so what I would say to your listeners is no matter where you are in your process, if you could begin immediately today with self-compassion and gentle kindness towards yourself, that would be a giant step in the right direction.
Yeah. And I'd add to that to say you have to notice all those things that come up that challenge it. And then those have to be the things that you work on.
That's
Because
it. That's
as
the
soon as
first.
you start turning in a direction like that, there's going to be all sorts of little voices and pings about why you're not worthy of that or all this kind of stuff. And we know that it's very, very common when we're going through these transitions in our life to experience guilt and paralysis and everything else. So, how do you help people to cope with those emotions as they move forward, especially if they're not quite ready to take action yet?
Yeah, it's really, I think that the beauty of coaching is there's either an inner dialogue or an outer dialogue going on. And so often people come and it's like, I feel this feeling, how do I get rid of it? So let's say it's guilt. I feel guilty. Well, you don't just feel guilty. You don't just wake up feeling guilty. You have a thought. And whatever that thought is leading to an emotion. So let's go back, let's go under the covers and look at the thought. And when we can start looking at those, the beauty of what unfolds, it's like a lotus flower, because then the thought is a belief. And then it's like they'll be talking about the belief, and it might not sound like they actually resonate with it that much. And then it's like, so whose belief is that? Whose voice is that? How long have you been living your life under the blueprint of that belief? Do you want to keep it? Is it serving you? Do you want to throw it out? And all of a sudden, it's like, I don't even believe that. I can't even believe I'm saying that. And a few minutes later, so how's that guilt feeling? Well, it's dissipated. It's gone. It's gone because I I untangled that web of just this one behavior. And so really, it's almost as if I go into the spider's nest and I help people just untangle all their webs until clarity comes. And once
Yeah.
clarity comes, there's freedom, there's confidence, there's hope where there might not have been hope. There could be fear right on the heels of that because holy shit, this means I have to go.
Right.
Um, and then that's the other part of it too, is when someone's working with a coach and they say it out loud, it's like, well, you can't unsay it and you can't unknow it. And so that becomes part of the journey too.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, I know for me, divorce was one of the earlier times. I've always been a personal development junkie and loved self-help, but it was probably one of the first really deep dives that I did into really looking at myself and all my thoughts and all sorts of other things in a whole new way. And I think maybe it's a generalization, maybe I just see it because it's what I see in me, but I think it's the same for a lot of people. I think a lot of people kind of, don't quite get to that introspection until they're in the throes of divorce.
Well, I think that there are those big things, right? So I would put divorce up there with losing a loved one, finding out about like a serious illness, going bankrupt. Like there
Yeah.
are certain
Any
things
big
that
transformative
that,
change.
that which devastates transforms. It's kind of like show me a crisis. And some people go through the crisis and they're the exact same on the other side. And I always feel like that's the most heartbreaking.
Mhm.
But the dissolution of a marriage, of a business, of so many things is crisis. And it does. It invites, not everyone takes the invitation, but it does invite that awareness. I will say that I'm a child of sexual abuse, pretty severe sexual abuse, and I did a lot of work on my body and being a woman and what all of that meant. And somehow um, that never bridged to the level of personal work and transformation that I experienced in my divorce. And so just as you were saying that, I was like, well, that's interesting because I do consider that I was fairly unconscious. And so there was this one area of my life I was working on, but somehow my life and my world wasn't connected
Yeah,
the way
not
it is.
integrated,
Like
right?
as in my 20s and 30s, I like maybe I saw it as like different spokes or something. But when I got divorced, it's like it was just all one big messy soup and it was all connected.
Yeah. And I guess perhaps for me, I mean, my divorce was pretty, I was in my 20s still, so I was still very young and, I had one child, but I hadn't had any like major catastrophic things
Yeah.
to unfurl prior to that.
Yeah.
Now, when I look back now and I realize a lot of things that did, definitely happen prior to that, that I then with the newfound consciousness was able to explore that were, happened much earlier in my life. But that was like the first thing that really kind of like knocked me around in a way that I wasn't familiar with.
And I think in our 20s, I mean, I have two kids in their 20s, and and there's just a lot of I'll live forever, I'm invincible, like, and then life happens, and that's really when it's almost like we're shook awake in some ways. It's like, well, wait a second, this is more complex, and there's more to me and life and the connections. And divorce definitely does that.
Yeah. I'm grateful, I will say, for the ways that it allowed me to understand that it, wasn't life ending or unsafe to start exploring those things more, because I know that helps me in my current marriage of 15 plus years to not be afraid to challenge things or to have difficult conversations or whatever else, because I know how much good can come from it. And that, I'll survive. And so will he. And usually, every time so far, we've been better off for it. So I'm grateful for that.
And I think that goes for the work that you and I invite people into as well.
Yeah.
Uh, it's not for the faint of heart. It takes courage. It really takes courage to look in the mirror and say, no matter what I know is wrong with this other human being, I've brought my marbles to the table and it's time for me to take a look at them and decide what stays and what goes.
Yeah. So share with us a little bit about how people work with you and, when it's time to hire someone like you and what kind of things you offer to help people navigate this journey.
Yeah, I think first of all, people come to us all different times before they even know if they're mending or ending until post-divorce, where they're struggling and it's like, he still hasn't changed, she still hasn't changed type thing. I think that when you find that there's so much free stuff out there, Teresa, I think people get to a point where it's like, well, I'm listening to podcasts and I'm reading books and I'm reading articles. And the truth is, going from information to transformation um,
More of a commitment.
requires and support, requires the support of another human being. It's kind of like if I'm out in the ocean and I'm drowning, I decide to wave off the lifeguard, shame on me. Um, and so I've had a lot of people too who are like, I've been in therapy, but it's not, and I could connect the dots, but it's not doing it. And so in a nutshell, divorce coaching is about um, helping you on two paths. One is emotionally very different than what your therapist does. We're helping you in the moment understand, I connected the dots, but why do I still do that thing? And so we go again under the covers to, what is that tender underbelly? What are your triggers? What are your beliefs? And so we help you navigate your emotional response throughout the divorce very differently. Your response to your kids, your in-laws, your attorney, your ex. And because we live in the world of divorce, we can support you in figuring out, how do I choose an attorney? What kind of questions do I ask? How do I find a financial support person? Or am I fighting the right fight with this custody, or am I being unreasonable, or I want to hold on to my marital home, it's so important to me, but can I afford it, and how do I make that decision? And so it could be logistical, it could be decision making, it could be emotional, but all of these things end up like in a pea soup. And what a divorce coach can do is help you determine, number one, are you worrying about next month's problem now? And is that serving you? And what is front and center? And where are you struggling the most? And how can you, and I think with all the entire team, the core of it is every decision you're making moving you closer to what you desire or further away? And so we try to help people gain the three words that I use is calm, clear, and confident. And those are three things we typically aren't when we're leaving our marriage. And so how do I get really centered and regulated? How do I get clear when everything is overwhelming, confusing, and murky? And then what parts of my confidence have been chipped away, and how do I begin to rebuild that? And when you have those three things, you're an effective partner with your attorney. You can make those really big, like rest of your life decisions from a seat of certainty,
Yeah.
or as certain as one can be.
Sure, absolutely. Those are like my three favorite words in my business too. Calm, clear, confident. They're good ones. They seem to answer all the issues, don't they? When we can restore those and cultivate those and level those up, everything gets better. So I love that. Can you provide any kind of like stories from your coaching experience of somebody who like has successfully managed this crossroads and, something that might provide a little inspiration or exploration for somebody going through a similar experience?
Yeah. Is your so let me I'll give you two stories. One is a gray divorce. And it's a woman who was married for 36 years, and a very wealthy surgeon, or at least doctor spouse, and she lived on an allowance, and so much so was the control that he would put his hand over the amount that he made on the tax return, and she would sign it. So she was just very lost. She was very lost, and she was very confused, and she actually ended up with some pretty serious illnesses, which in my opinion was a manifestation.
Yeah.
Um, and we worked together for quite some time. And what happened through the process of working together was so many beliefs that she held were inaccurate. And I'm actually in the process of doing a free expiring mini course. I can't give you a link to it just yet, but it's evicting your spouse from your mind and reclaiming your sanity. And with high conflict, especially, that's so typical, where you're not thinking your thoughts, you're not feeling your feelings. You've gotten so lost in the chaos and bigness and conflict of the other person that you're living a life that's not even yours. Like you're not able to. And so when I found out down the road a piece that this person, worked in Congress and like is a rock star, and was a rock, like just amazing. And it slowly started coming back. So much so that at the very tail end, and her spouse was like really one of the higher conflict individuals, he did whatever he did, one more court order or whatever, and her whole legal team was up in arms. And like, this was such a big celebration for her and me. And she was like, okay, guys, we're taking a beat. We're not doing anything. We're not reacting or responding. Everyone really needs to calm down. This is just one more game. We'll give it 48 hours and we'll see if there's anything we have to do. And she had a team of like 4 or 5 attorneys at this point because it was just so big and complex. And she went from like being a mouse and having like nothing to stand on to being completely and fully in her power and her authenticity, um and to me, that's why I do what I do. Like
Yeah.
this woman's life completely turned around, and she's, she's later in life and her best years is still ahead of her, and she's so excited, and
I love
and
that.
she's disease free, and she's
Oh,
healthy,
that's
and
so
it's
good.
like, so so that's one example of what happens when you do this work. And we have a series on Journey Beyond Divorce called Voices of Celebration. There's got to be 25 to 30 of them at least. And every one of them, and mostly women, but every one of them, a handful of guys, talks about how this was the most devastating, worst thing that was ever going to happen to them as they entered, and how each one of them, and not that life is easy or that the divorce was easy, each one of them were so immensely grateful for the journey and the growth and the human being that they are on the other side of it. And that's it. That's the whole point of doing this.
Oh, I love that. Those were great stories. Thank you for sharing those. When are you going to be running the little mini workshop that you were just talking about?
So that's going to be an ongoing free offer. It's actually I it'll be up and running by the first of the year.
Okay, perfect. So where would people go if they want to find out more about it when this airs?
It'll be
I'll
on the
try to be
front.
in alignment.
Yeah, so I wish I could give a link right now, but if you go to the homepage if you go to journeybeyonddivorce.com, you'll end up on our homepage, and we'll probably have a big banner as soon as we're releasing it. And it's a
Great. And
great
you
way
can
to.
send me the link as soon as it's available, and I'll make sure it ends up in the show notes for you so that that'll be
Excellent.
easier for any of you who are driving or want to just directly get there. I will make sure that that's in the show notes for you so that you can check that out and sign up if it's aligned for you. So, where else can people find out about you? I'm assuming your website's probably the best place.
Yeah, journeybeyonddivorce.com, the Journey Beyond Divorce podcast are really the best ways. And we do have, and this is also at the top of the homepage, we do offer a rapid relief call. So if somebody's knows that they want more than just resources, but they don't know what that looks like, and they're uncertain, we'll do a free coaching call and just help you gain clarity, share the different offerings that we have, and see if we can get you connected. So or you could go to rapidreliefcall.com. It goes to the same place.
Perfect. Love that. That's great. So definitely check that out if this is something that you're going through right now. And are there any thoughts or ideas that you'd like to leave listeners with today? Anything that maybe we didn't cover or that's still
There's
on your heart or mind?
There's a saying that I often like to end with. It's the mantra that I run my life by, and that is that every upset is a setup for personal work. And so if every time you find yourself triggered, angry, annoyed, scared, disappointed, whatever the upset is, and you could take a beat and get quiet, and rather than look at who and what caused it, go inside. uh, It's just incredible because we all get triggered on a regular basis, and we usually see it as a negative, but it's like, oh, wait a second, there's a gift in here. Every upset is a setup.
I love that. Yes, there's an invitation for sure. I love that. That's a great saying. Thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you for being here with us today, Karen. And thank you to everyone who's listening as well. I know everyone has a choice of what you want to listen to when you choose a podcast, and I appreciate that you chose Becoming More Me to listen to today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for spending some of your precious time with me today. If you loved this episode, please leave a review or simply share it with someone else who would get great benefit from it too. If you share on social media, please tag me so I can personally connect and thank you. Until next time, keep taking bold and brave steps towards becoming more of who you want to be in this world. You are capable, you are worthy, and you are enough. And if your inner critic is still trying to argue with those facts, hit me up. We've got work to do.